everyone, this is Catherine at Microbalance Health Products. We have a live tonight on healthy habits with Colette, and so I'm going to invite her to join us right now. Colette is a board certified hormones and gut health coach. She specializes in helping women heal their gut and their hormones. And here's Colette. Hi, Colette.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. It's good to see you.
You too.
Well, I guess I just want to start by saying that nothing Colette and I discussed tonight should be considered medical advice. It's for informational purposes only and should not be used to diagnose or treat any disease. And so, with that said, we can get started. I think a really good place to start is for Colette to tell everybody what she does and what the difference between what she does is with someone like a medical doctor or a naturopathic doctor, and sort of where the things meet and where they divide is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, no, I love that place to start because so many times people will come to me and they'll be like, "But I'm working with a doctor." I'm like, "That's fine. That we integrate beautifully." And I get referrals from doctors all the time too. And sometimes people just need help with those habits. That's why we're going to be talking about that. But I also want to talk about like there's health coaches and then there's functional medicine health coaches. And I'm board certified, which means I did an additional a lot more training and studying to pass a national board. So that's governed by the National Board of Medical Examiners. So we're considered in the medical field. And a lot of people think of health coaches separately. So a
Mm-hmm.
health coach often will tell you what to do, which is different than really what I do. And then we'll say, you know, eat this, here's the diet, here's the lifestyle, here's all the different hacks we want you to look at. For me, as a board certified health coach, what I do is I really work with people where they
Okay.
are and help close that gap. So if they're working with a doctor and not in and struggling, like for example, they can't take their pills and they're having trouble with consistency, I'm going to help them and say, okay, where is that challenge happening? And how can we figure that out? How can we solve that together? But I help them connect the dots. So often habits get in the way. And that's why I think, you know, when we talked about that,
Yeah.
habits get in the way of you recovering because those habits have to be formed first by the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that mindset of how can I versus I can't,
Mm-hmm.
then you won't develop those right habits. So everything is very habit based that I do. And I do a lot of education and people get better. Their labs improve. Their energy comes back. The stress gets reduced. They're able to sleep more. But we see really huge results just from focusing from a habit based and really involving your mindset and seeing what we can do to flip to the other side. Um,
Okay.
I always say I use a 5 step process, which I call light, which is letting go, talking about what things you can let go of, either it's things or let go of mentally, igniting from within.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get excited about that? Gaining a better understanding. So, how can we close that gap?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on happiness, that what is going to make me feel joy? What is
Okay.
going to make me happy? And then trusting the process so you can transform.
Okay. And before we kind of start launching into the habits that we're going to be talking about tonight, mostly centered around mold exposure and that type of recovery, I want to say, because I completely forgot to say this, is we're doing a giveaway that's part of the live. So if you stick around to the end, we're just going to take a screenshot of all of the handles of everyone that joined and then randomly pick one to win a free bottle of our CitriDrops nasal spray. And it's sold out right now. So this is sort of an exclusive. So if you win, you get a bottle, even though it's sold out. So that's that. But well, I will also say that Colette wrote an article that is published on sinusitiswellness.com, and we'll put the link in the caption at the end. But it has everything that we're going to be talking about tonight sort of mapped out in article form. So if you want to reference that to kind of keep things a little bit more easy to digest, that is my recommendation. So I guess we're going to start. We've got 11 habits, and we'll kind of go through each one. And then I think Colette's going to give sort of an actionable step to go with each one, so that maybe you can take something that you hear tonight and start implementing it right away to improve your situation, no matter where you are with your mold journey, whether you're just finding out that it's a problem, or maybe you're deep in it, years into it, and you're just not feeling like you're getting any kind of forward movement. I think this is for everybody. Okay, so the first place you start is the nervous system. You want to talk about why, maybe?
Yeah, yeah. So naturally, and you and I were talking about this, you think start in the environment. But after I've worked with quite a few people, and I've gone through this 4 times in dealing with mold myself, sometimes you can't start there.
Mhm.
And the reason you can't start there is because your nervous system, your mindset is not stable. I shouldn't say stable, but it's looping, right? You might
Mhm.
have these negative thought patterns. You might be just not so overwhelmed that you can't make a decision.
Mhm.
And I've talked with a number of clients in the last couple of weeks like that, of just, I don't know what to do because I'm so overwhelmed. So addressing the nervous system first, I feel often leads to better outcomes, because
Mhm.
then you're of the right mindset to go, okay, now that I've got myself a little bit calm, less overwhelmed, I can now address my environment.
So could you give me sort of an example of what that would look like to someone when you say addressing your nervous system?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, mold is very interesting. I kind of consider it like a little animal that kind of gets in your body, and it puts you in this odd state. It's like the referred to a moldy brain, or this chronic fight or flight, where we're running from this imaginary bear, but
mhm.
there's no bear.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was sitting for the national board. I was doing things and I couldn't catch my breath. I was meditating twice a day and could not figure out why it wasn't enough.
Mhm.
People would say, oh, go meditate, oh, go do this. And
Yeah.
it wasn't enough for me because I was in a moldy environment. I wasn't aware of that. And so you can do things like deep breathing. There's a
Mhm.
4-7-8 breath where you breathe in through 4, hold for 7, and out through 8. You can try that. But if that's not enough, and longer meditations is sometimes where it is, if people are able to do those where they go past 30 minutes and they
Mhm.
go longer, and that's where there's huge changes. Getting out of your space sometimes to address your nervous system will help. So if it's not snowy, maybe you want to go outside and try to do some breathing outside, do some grounding exercises where you might be walking barefoot to just kind of ground your body more with the soil and that type of thing, and it actually grounds your nervous system. Even sometimes people with yoga, or sometimes it's just walking,
Mhm.
getting out. I was talking with a client about this the other day, and I'm like, how quickly can you just get out 10 minutes and get outside?
Yeah.
Because when you're inside, and if you're in a moldy environment, your thoughts are not going to be the same as if you're outside walking.
Mhm.
And it,
I think what a lot of people don't realize, it sort of triggers those excitability, and I don't even know if that's the right word, but centers in the brain,
yes,
to where it's like this, you're almost like overly stimulated when you're in the environment. And I can speak from experience. From
right.
Unfortunately, I can speak from experience, but yeah. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so number two is address your environment and clean your air, which I think it's great to read the article, but we can discuss this here. And that you're not saying that it has to be perfect. You're just
Yeah.
saying step two is acknowledge it and begin to
hmm
address it.
Yeah, it's acknowledge and begin to address it. I think you and I were talking about this, where the first step, and I was just talking with someone about this, and one of my new clients today, about what do I do?
Hmm.
And that's the first question. And sometimes when you hit the nervous system and you address that, then you're able to deal with, what do I do
Hmm.
now? Is I have found mold or I suspect it. So do I have to look at someone? First of the question is really, am I going to stay? Is this a permanent place for me and I want to stay put? Or am I just going to go ahead and move and try to sell it? Or if you're renting it, just try to get out of the lease. That's the first question. And then secondly, it's about addressing, I have to get some kind of clean air. Like I've got to breathe in something. So what can I do at the moment? Are there there's a lot of different steps. And your EC3 products, you know, you have the foggers. And I remember we used that when we were moving.
Mm-hmm.
We put everything in the garage and we fogged it
Mm-hmm.
before we moved it to a new place. And then we also used one of your other products that we cleaned everything to. And we did
Mm-hmm.
that also with the laundry before we like put it in bags and then we moved it. So it's a process. And during the process, I will say you are constantly addressing that nervous system of changing your mindset. And you and I were talking about that. I remember having to throw things out,
Mm-hmm.
addressing my environment and crying
Mm-hmm.
and singing a song to get through it. And
Yeah.
that's as real as I can be, is those are the things you do have to release your emotions
Mm-hmm.
to deal with. This is hard, you know, this, but there's ways to make it easier by acknowledging to yourself, okay, I got to do this one way or another. So, you know, looking at your HVAC systems, we had mold actually go through
Mm-hmm.
ours. And so we had to address that. And there's things you can do to mitigate that. Looking at your air cleaners, or do you have air cleaners in there that actually get rid of mold? Mold is tiny, tiny spores. I remember even looking at our HVAC system, and the one we had in place was not the right filter to
Mm-hmm.
actually filter out mold. And a lot of people don't know that either. So, you know, your air cleaners, you know, also acknowledging, hey, if I'm feeling poorly or I have all the signs of mold, or I did a test and mold showing up in my body, where is it in the house? You're going to be looking at leaks and following the water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, big things I hear from people all the time is there was a leak and we didn't get to it. Well, it only takes a couple days for mold to grow,
Yeah.
especially grow from white to black, right? And different molds such as cadimonium and stachybotrys, those are more dangerous molds that are going to are ones that you need to pay attention to, because those ones, like on reports, you're going to be saying, wait a minute, those are ones that I'm really going to listen to say, hey, what can I do? Do I really want to stay? Is this a permanent thing for me? Do I want to stay in this environment? So looking at your materials in your home of what can stay, what has to be tossed, if I'm in a moldy space. But the first thing is getting that clean air. Can you open up windows? Can you get outside and walk? What can you do? What can you fog? And someone right there is talking about the fogger.
Yeah.
Um, and and I love that because you're addressing the nervous system there. Is what can you do for your space right now? And to not make it overwhelming, I want you to think of the top three things. Like, don't go beyond that, because anytime we're in an overwhelmed state, if we have too many decisions, we can have paralysis.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I always try to encourage people to that, try to move the big rocks. And, if you can just triage some of the littler things. I mean,
mhm,
I had a really hard time, and even saying this out loud now sounds ridiculous to me, but I had all these Madame Alexander dolls from when I was young. And I was so fixated on how to keep those dolls
mhm,
that I would become immobilized at doing some of the bigger things as far as our environment. And my husband just went to Walmart and got me this enormous plastic bin. And he was like, I'm just going to put these dolls in this bin. And we're going to just get them out of the house. We don't
yep,
have to decide. We don't have to clean them.
yep,
And just knowing that, they were sort of like contained and
mhm,
saved maybe for a later date kind of just allowed me to let go of it. And
yes,
then once we got well and I opened that bin and took one whiff of them, I was like, I'm fine. we can get rid of them now. But I think, sometimes it takes clearing the fog to be
Yes.
able to really make the decisions for your health, which
Yes.
are the ones that really do matter. And so I just encourage people, like, if you feel stymied about it, just save it for later, maybe store
Yes.
it,
Yes.
you don't have to make every decision about things like your wedding dress on the day that you're trying to, you know, reclaim your life. And,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly. I love
um,
that. We did the exact same thing is I put stuff in bins that I couldn't part with. And
yeah,
ironically, when you're thinking clearly, it's amazing you're thinking, how is it possible I couldn't part with this?
yeah,
But you'll notice too, if once you get out of the space, sometimes things don't bother you until you re-enter the space. And I was
mhm,
telling you about this, is that we re-entered to grab things, and I was shocked. And I told my husband, "Are your eyes burning like mine?" And they never burned in the space
mhm.
because sometimes your symptoms can escalate when you get out because your body's out of that fight or
Right,
flight,
right,
and the mold, you only half breathing in the mold because your body's kind of protecting itself, isn't allowing you to feel some of those other symptoms. So we could only stand being in there, and I was like, I'm
yeah,
done. I'm just going to
yeah,
leave and not worry about it at this point.
yeah. And I believe I read somewhere that it's kind of called like unmasking. It's like once you get out of the environment and you clear enough, you become acutely aware of how toxic it is, and you can't even believe that you were living there and functioning,
Yeah.
which is probably a different conversation for a different day. But
Right.
um,
Right. No,
and
that's, yep,
yeah.
that's true.
Okay, so we'll move on to three, and it's change your mindset set to stop looping and start having hope. So,
So it's so easy. And it's interesting. There's different people I'll talk to. And I was talking to a lady the other day, and the looping I could see, and she couldn't get herself out of the looping to get help
mhm,
because all she thought is, what if, and this is happening, and this is that. And we would try to talk about, well, this is what you could do, but I can't.
mhm,
And when you have those negative loops of those words like, I can't versus how can I, or I don't have time, but I actually do have time. Practicing that, practicing reframing that, whether it's writing it down, saying it out loud, posting it on your phone, journaling that.
mhm,
I mean, some people aren't journalers, but you could do, voice recordings to hear yourself and put, keeping a journal. I'll have my clients keep wins journals of, it doesn't matter. Just put one win a day,
mhm.
3 wins, and you're going to be shocked at how many wins you actually have. And if you focus on those wins versus what's not happening,
Yeah,
you can stop looping right out of that, and then really focusing on what you're grateful for.
mhm,
Because I had to do that we had two very big situations where we had to move out, and people would say, well, but the insurance isn't covering. Aren't you upset about that? And I said, yeah, but I have to let it go. I
right,
have to focus on what I'm grateful for, which is we got out of this. We have a place to go to. Um, it's going to be remediated. We're able to pay for it. Like I focused every day on what I could control, because there are
mhm,
certain things that are out of your control. So
yeah,
when I focused on that, you feel better and you
mhm,
stop looping as much.
yeah. I mean, and just even things like focusing on the positive aspect of letting go of things. I know it feels very negative when you're there, but sometimes it's kind of a gift, to not carry certain things with you, especially
Yeah.
into a new healthy space. It's kind of an opportunity to really focus on, what truly matters.
Hmm.
Which is not, it's sort of a forced focus, obviously, not one that you choose, but for sure. Okay. And then let's see, we've got go slowly and do not introduce too much too quickly. I love this
Yeah.
one.
Well, this is such a big one, right? Because so often I'll have people that come to me and they don't know why they're feeling horrible. They're on tons of supplements. They don't know what's going on.
Mhm.
They feel horribly. and they've done, they've gone to three different doctors and they're using three different methods and eating various things. And they're on maybe eating some foods, and because the reaction isn't till like a week later, they don't realize it's a reaction from the food. Um, they're on drugs that are interacting with their supplement, and they just feel awful. That's all they know. And it's like they just come with this pile of what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea behind it is going slowly. So even when you're working with, a doctor, or you have supplements you're using, is going slow and asking them. And a lot of times I'll ask people, can I reach out to the doctor? Because working with me, they really understand that anything is possible,
Mm-hmm.
is and saying that if I go slow and I introduce one thing at a time, I'm going to probably feel better. For
Yeah.
example, there are certain probiotics that are stronger, spore based. And I remember I had a doctor who couldn't understand why my body went to pain. Well, I happened to be in mold and it was too strong for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a long time. I sprinkled it and would just sprinkle and sprinkle till I got up to the dosage of two.
Yeah.
Now it took me a month, but that's okay because I was eventually able to get my body to be able to accept it.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and so go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, on in that vein too, and you and I discussed this when we talked like this earlier this week, but I think and I hope that people will hear me when I say this, that if there is this supplement, I don't know what it would be, but something out there that everyone's heard of that has been so wonderful and has healed so many people, and for whatever reason your body can't handle it, it
Hmm.
is not a failure of you,
No,
and you should not
no.
continue. Everyone is so unique and
Yes,
has a unique biology and chemistry. And so, and also if you can't take it right away, it doesn't mean that you can't take it maybe in the future.
yes,
But for whatever reason, your body's saying no, and it's okay. And, working with someone like you gives people permission to say, okay, this isn't working for me,
yes,
even though it, has helped a lot of people. It's not helping me, so it's okay to stop um,
yes, yes. I love
trying to
that.
use it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah. And so the other thing I wanted to ask you too are, so how, in your approach, how many things do you typically start somebody with if they're not working with a doctor? Is it more just like the habits, or do you actually, um, like, do you recommend supplements ever, or is that something you kind of leave for them and their doctor?
So
I was
legally, I'm not allowed to recommend. I'm allowed to share.
okay.
And so I will share supplements that have a lot of research behind it, or share supplements that a lot of doctors love, or ones that I've used. And
Hmm.
I always tell people, so I educate and tell them about the supplements, the best forms, so I'll share what I'm using, or if they ask me. Um, and I give people links on how to get them, through really better places, so that they're not ordering them off Amazon and stuff like that that's
Yeah.
tampered with. But so I share that and I educate them, and I always tell them, double check, because to make sure it doesn't, with your doctor, doesn't counteract with a drug or anything
Hmm.
else you're taking. But I do share and I educate for sure. Um, and then we get so much into the habit. So if someone's not working, and I get a lot of people like this with a doctor, they're going to go a lot further with me, and we can change a lot of labs pretty quickly. And they can feel better. I've had people feel better even in mold.
Hmm.
Now, in mold, realizing you're going to feel better, but you are fighting that up and down because you need
Yeah.
clean air.
Yeah.
Um, but we can get you to feel better so you can start being able to operate at all levels. But so often that's, like your drops I love. Is the CitriDrops, putting them in the nose, and I know there's different ones you have too,
Mhm.
because mold first, you're sniffing it in first, so you don't realize it hits your nasal passages. So that's where you address it first. But if someone's not working with a doctor, they're going to start oftentimes with me of of just closing that gap. So we set some goals of where it's their short-term and long-term
Hmm.
goals that they want to do. And I'll tell them, oftentimes this takes a team of people, is we'll get you as far as we can. And sometimes they don't need additional help. It depends on where their body is. It
Hmm.
depends on what they've done, how far they've gone. We can do a lot with diet, lifestyle, all of those types of things wrapped up in the education. Like I was just talking with somebody and and a couple of people actually had nosebleeds. And I said, "Are you in mold?" And this particular person said, "Yeah." And I said, "Are you taking Q-Certin?" Said, "Yeah." Well, Q-Certin actually can cause nosebleeds if you're in
Hmm.
mold. Like, well, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. And so she's been taking that, and that's not been supportive to her. So
Hmm.
that educational piece was very helpful. So she was like, "Oh, nobody's told me this,
Hmm.
that I actually shouldn't, I probably don't want to be taking this." The other thing that can happen too, and this is go slow to go fast, is if people not understanding that um, if you're in an environment where there's mold, and I had this happen when with one of my clients, where the doctor actually put her on an antifungal, and she had an anaphylactic response
Yeah.
because
It was
they
too
didn't realize
much.
she was in mold. It
Hmm.
was too much. So going slow to go fast allows your body to just take in so that it can go slowly so that you can speed up later.
Hmm.
Um, and that might even be sauna. Sauna sometimes isn't brought in till later because it's too much detoxing for some people.
Hmm. Yeah. And just even sometimes with sauna, just starting in a couple minutes and getting out, even if you haven't started sweating, and just working your way up, go slow to go fast.
Yep,
Another one. Yeah.
yep,
Okay. So number 5 is address your stress levels.
yes,
And I know this sounds insurmountable to somebody who's in mold, like saying for them to not stress as much. Maybe you can kind of talk about um, like your approach, which I
yeah,
think is really helpful.
yeah.
Um, just like with the time blocking and creating boundaries for your
Mhm.
energy, how that looks.
So creating boundaries, and I do this with my clients a lot. I even have, which I didn't touch on, I even have a course that addresses mold and addresses your whole body since mold really wreaks havoc on everything. So I created a whole course for people on that, just so that they could keep listening to the videos over and over again if they forgot, because that's
Yeah.
common with mold too, being forgetful. So stress is right. We always have stress around us, but mold does heighten things because of the nervous system
Hmm.
piece. And when you're stuck in a chronic disease, your nervous system could get stuck, which means your stress is going to raise.
Hmm.
It also, you could be stuck on certain things, such as my weight has gone up. Well, mold loves to hide in fat. So that's probably going to happen. And if your stress is high, your cortisol is going to be high, which means it's going to be in the belly,
Hmm.
is where you're going to be retaining that. So it's perspective. It's gaining that perspective to say, what is in my control and what boundaries can I create around my energy. So if your energy is low or completely depleted, what boundaries do you want to create around it? Like, what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to? Because that could be adding extra stress. And I actually have a boundaries video in my course for this reason, because sometimes we have that guilt too, of like the guilt that I got sick, the guilt that I have a family and I'm not able to provide for them. And that's a stressor.
Hmm.
Letting go of that stress and being okay where I am right now is I will focus on what I can do. I will focus on creating safe and healthy boundaries for me. And I will focus on one habit at a time that I can, and one decision at a time that I can make to put myself in a better situation and put my family in a better situation. So those boundaries around energy is super important. And then blocking your time. So blocking your time out to say, okay, sometimes we have to do that for ourselves. I'll take this much time to be upset and then I'm done.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to have to move on. And so how are you going to get out your stress? What kind of support do you have in place? Sometimes those support groups that are specifically for mold can be depressing.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about that and just drain you. And maybe you don't want to be hearing about every mold problem that everybody has, because then that puts you on hyper alert
Yeah.
and you can't sleep and you're into the what ifs.
I mean, I kind of try to recommend to people, especially when they're kind of in the thick of it. This goes back to the looping that we were talking about. I do think you kind of need to choose your true north, whatever that may be. And whether that is someone like Colette or a doctor or whoever, and let that person sort of be your guide rather than, I think support groups are wonderful things. Please, I hope nobody gets me
Yeah.
wrong about that. But I think sometimes asking for the opinions of a lot of people in the same predicament as you are can create looping,
Mhm.
and then trying everything possible to the point where you're exhausting yourself in another way and you kind of don't even know what is working and what isn't, because there's just so you've got way too much that you're doing. So that's my advice about that. And I do think kind of later on, if with more specific things, sometime, or for emotional support, or just to know that there are other people
Mhm.
dealing with the same thing that you are, I think that's what those groups are great for. But I do think it can get highly negative very quickly.
Yeah.
And you probably don't need that type of stress. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Okay, so number 6 is open up detox pathways.
Yes. And
um
this is, sorry, if you did you want to
no, no,
talk?
no. Go,
Okay.
go. Take.
Okay. So this one is huge, and I'll tell you why. So I was on I put myself on a protocol, and I was actually traveling through Europe. And before I even went to Europe, I had this weird person getting into this. It talks about mindset. I had this weird anxiousness that I never had before. But like, I was reading about how someone couldn't catch their breath on a plane and she had to leave. So all of a sudden in my head, I thought that was going to be me.
Hmm.
So I brought this air filtration system that was personalized, never ended up using it on the plane. And I remember jumping on the plane, and this gets back to that point, is that I started getting nervous, and
Hmm.
then I started getting nervous, and then I was like, okay, Colette, you have to gather your thoughts and refocus, and don't focus on what's making you nervous.
Hmm.
Focus on, so I started retraining my brain to not loop, getting back to that looping, and I was able to do it very quickly. Ironically, nothing ever happened. So everything I thought that was going to happen didn't, because I retrained my brain. And I had never felt claustrophobic on a plane, but it had been planted in a support group, which gets to that. So one of the things when I went to Europe, because I wasn't sure I was even going to be able to do it, um, I was taking a protocol and my legs kept swelling.
Mm.
And so what I realized was the lymph was completely backing up, and I needed a lot more support with the lymph. So I was doing a lot of the exercises to open up the detox pathways in the lymph system, which we'll get into, so that my body would start release, because we were in like 105-degree weather, which was actually a blessing, because my body kept saying, well, at least I'm detoxing because I'm pulling it out in this
Yeah.
weather. But I had to open things up. I had to open up. So I had to do that lymph massage that allowed my body to have lymph drainage. Sometimes there's specific supplements that you need to go to that work well for you. For me, because I was a cancer survivor and I didn't know this and had Hodgkin's, that's of the lymph. So I didn't realize that was going to be a sore point for
Yeah.
me, of every time I would have to address my lymph system. And what worked for other people, like you were saying, didn't necessarily work for me. So opening up your detox pathways, it might be the bowel movements. And I always ask people, like, how many do you have a day? Because if you're on all these supplements and you're not going to the bathroom, you're just reabsorbing. And
Hmm.
so that's where people start getting the rashes, and they start getting the histamine issues and the joints, and they start getting more and more issues because they start reabsorbing everything that they're trying to pull
Right.
out. So making sure that you're able to get that out. The kidney support and the liver support. A lot of times people will need things like milk thistle, that's out there that supports the liver, and so often that's where our liver and our kidneys take a big hit.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that going to a doctor before I realized I was in mold, and she kept saying, "You're retaining so much water. It's like at 80%. It's like all around your middle." And I couldn't understand it until I
Yeah.
realized it was my kidneys, right, that took a big hit from the mold. And really, it's a protection for us.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to be doing all this work to further get your to detox, if you don't open up and support your body, that's where things take a downturn and you start feeling worse.
Yeah.
So I see that happen a lot.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely can't detox if if your pathways aren't open, that's for sure. And just like supporting all phases of the liver process, all those good things. Okay. So be intentional. Um,
Yeah.
you want to talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
one?
So every choice really during recovery matters. And intentionality is important because it could be about the foods that you're eating to the reducing your toxic load. And if you and listening to your body, and
Mhm.
that one is really key because yeah, I like rebounding
Me
too. So
too.
just saying that.
I love it.
And so one of the things why that's so important is the fact that so many times we get caught in this fear of missing out, and versus I call it Joan, which is the joy of adding new,
Hmm.
is sometimes we need to focus on how can I have joy in adding something new and being intentional about it? Being intentional about like, I like the ritual around like somebody might be drinking coffee or something, and that coffee isn't good for them. And most coffee is moldy. There are some brands out there that are not, but so they may have to replace that with a different beverage, and they get caught up with not being able to do it. So that being intentional by saying, wait a minute, I like the ritual. What could I replace?
Right.
What kind of fun thing can I be looking for? Um, Filtering your water and understanding that the clean water really matters.
Hmm.
And if your body's not retaining the water, meaning you're going to the bathroom right away, which can happen with mold, do things like what I have here, which is I put an electrolyte in there.
Hmm.
So making sure that it's getting into your cells, and then also being intentional with the electrolytes if they have citric acid in there, which is normally manufactured with mold. It's derived from mold. Not
Yeah.
everyone's is, but a lot of people don't do well with citric acid. And so being intentional to say, okay, I won't be adding to my fungal load,
Hmm.
and looking at that. And maybe it's about one decision. So maybe that decision is about your food. So
Hmm.
it could be that, you might, if you're retaining water, then maybe the celery and the cucumbers are the ones you're going to be eating and being intentional with that, to help with the kidney. Or maybe it's I'm going to be eating more eggs and onions and garlic and radishes to help with my liver
Hmm.
support. So that intentionality and saying, how can I bring this in versus I'm so overwhelmed I can't do that,
Yeah.
really helps.
Okay. I like that a lot. So would something like kind of making lists about things be an intentional move? I know that was the only reason I share that is because that was very helpful to me, because when I was doing a lot of my spinning and fight or flight, I would just make myself a simple list every day. And if I could get through the list, I just was like, I'm winning.
Yes.
Today I won.
Yes.
Even if the list
Yes.
was like drink, 55 ounces of water or something. I mean, my lists were very simple
Right.
during that time in my life, but it was very helpful.
Yeah. And I
And
love that.
it just felt to me like I was setting an intention of some sort, every day,
Yeah.
towards getting better.
Yeah.
So,
No, I love that because the list, especially you're saying keeping it small, is huge. I tell people when you're setting goals for yourself, one or two goals over a
mhm,
couple weeks. Too many goals, it's overwhelming. And if you're dealing with mold, maybe it's one goal.
yeah.
And that goal is to get my energy back, or what it is that's going to, move the dial the
Hmm.
most for you. And setting your top three. Maybe it's three things that you think you'll be able to do, or maybe it's just one. Sometimes for clients, it's can I get 4 hours or 2 hours of energy?
Hmm.
And that's a win
Yeah.
because they didn't have any. And then each day I said, build upon that and capture those wins so that at those times when you're feeling frustrated, you can go back and reread them and say, wait a minute, I have moved forward because healing journey, right? It's not linear. It goes
No.
backwards, forwards, sideways. And so some days you may feel like I'm not moving forward, but you are. It's just your perspective is you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's see. I had to make lists to keep up with what I could eat. Yeah. I hear you. Me too. It does get better, I promise. The mold for me, now this isn't for everybody, but the mold was sort of the root cause of all of my um, GI, SIBO, ulcerative colitis, all of it. And I literally felt like the joy of food had been removed from my life.
Right.
But you will get it back.
You
I
will.
promise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will.
Um,
That's the one thing too I want to mention is that hope.
yeah.
That hope piece is going to make the biggest difference. If you have to take a picture and put it up on the wall, or take the words hope and plaster it everywhere, and just keep reminding yourself, I have to have hope, I have to not give up, that will change everything because your mindset is going to dictate what behavior what you do
Hmm.
next. If you feel stuck, you're not going to have that hope and you're not going to be able to keep going and do what you need to do.
Hmm.
So that's where I help people. Like when it gets hard, that's a great time to call me. I mean,
Yeah.
people call me before it gets hard, but like help you make it a little bit easier and help you feel like you're winning so you feel better. I always tell people like you're going to feel better after the call than even when you first got on.
Hmm.
And that's what our goal is.
Yeah.
Um,
That's good. That accountability piece and just knowing someone else out there is like cheering you on is very helpful. Um,
yeah.
okay, let's see. Let's We've got slow down to speed up, which we kind of already covered.
Hmm.
Address energy levels.
Yes. And
And yeah, this is huge.
this is huge. Yeah, it's very big. And I want to it actually slow down to speed up in addressing energy levels. I want to talk because these I have an example, if I could. So I had a client um, that everything was wrapped around her working out.
mm,
And she would go and lift weights, but she got to the point where she was so depleted because she was in mold and didn't realize she was.
hmm.
And I started asking her questions of how do you feel after your workouts? And I'm tired. Does your energy ever come back? And she said, that's a great question. No. I said,
Oh,
okay, how would you feel about giving these up? I get a total silence, which is often when I ask people these challenging questions, like, well, but that's how I deal with stress. That's how I deal with emotional things. That's when I'm like, okay, let's find another tool for you to use to deal with all those other pieces. Could we do that? Yeah. What happened was she had to take a couple steps back
yeah.
so that her energy came back and stop lifting
Hmm.
because sometimes it's too much for your body while it's trying to heal.
Yeah.
And we see that with mold, right? Where there's times where you cannot exercise and you're lucky if you get in even the sauna. It's the idea is just to have blood circulating, whether
Hmm.
it's get in the sauna for 5 minutes, get on a rebounder, get on a vibration plate, or get out in, outside for 5 minutes to just get that blood flow. But
Hmm.
she had to stop altogether. And that's how we got her energy. We did other things, but that's one of the ways we got her energy back because no matter how many times she kept trying to go into the gym, it made things a lot worse.
Yeah.
And she couldn't reach that energy point until she was able to let go of that.
Yeah. I mean, when you're kind of pouring from an empty cup, it's just, it gets really, really hard on your body. And then it makes healing even harder. I mean, even sometimes with exercise with people, and I'm sure you've addressed this, it just looks like transforming your idea of
Mhm.
exercise as well. But and even switching to rebounding or walking or
Mhm.
yoga outside just until you kind of get those energy stores back. It doesn't, you're just kind of giving your body permission to heal sometimes.
I
Right.
love that
Yeah.
permission, that permission. And that's a key word that you said there, permission, because you're giving body permission to heal. You're giving your body permission to rest. And
Hmm.
that gets into that intentionality, slowing down, all of the things we've touched on is giving yourself permission and having no guilt around that you don't have the energy to do certain things, and having those boundaries in place to say, here is what I can do. And even sitting down with your family, because
Hmm.
if you're the one that's mold canary, and you've got the genes that basically support the fact that you don't detox
Hmm.
well, and that's why you're sicker than maybe someone else in your family. And I hear that all the time of like, why am I sicker and my husband's sitting here playing tennis, or everybody else is fine, and you just happen to be somebody who you just don't detox well. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you can't do something later to support your body detoxing,
Yeah.
so you're not running from house to house. But this whole idea of giving yourself permission is giving yourself permission to have a discussion with your family or even friends to say, hey, I got to protect my reserves, and
Hmm.
this is what I'm able to do, and this is what I cannot do, and be okay with that.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes for people that, exercise is their release, unfortunately can help you hold on to some of that inflammation, where just even taking walks instead can help your body kind of let go
Mm.
a little bit in order to make it to the next step. So, and then do you want, oh, sleep is the next one. I was going to
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
you about sleep and the energy levels, but sleep is number 10.
yeah,
So you want to address that a little bit?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So sleep, and I had actually had written down an example to go that also has to do with energy and sleep is if you're not sleeping, because it's one of the most powerful tools for recovery, yet mold disrupts our sleep. And then, one of my areas especially is hormones, which get wrecked by
Yeah.
mold too. So if I have all this going on, like the estrogen's gone and progesterone, you have all these little pieces, it feels very disruptive, but just have hope. You can get back to sleep. And I've even helped people get back to sleep in a moldy environment. So a consistent routine is huge. Of what kind of routine do you have, or do you just fall into bed?
Mm-hmm.
I know I had a lot of clients who couldn't sleep, and I'm like, well, what's your routine look like? And is there anything you're looking forward to doing at night? Also, the blue light exposure,
Mm-hmm.
stopping that a couple hours before bed if you can. Um, but it really starts in the morning with getting that light in your eyes, which creates that circadian rhythm, which is your sleep wake cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, and if you're not able to get the light in your eyes, getting a light that you can use, that's that UV light that you can use while you're getting ready in the morning, can actually help reset your sleep in probably about 30 days.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a matter of creating the right environment, creating the right protocols, and sometimes you need, magnesium. We talked about it. Magnesium works for so many functions in the body, like more than people even realize, and you might need that. And maybe if you're having trouble with pills, you can use a cream. There's creams out there, or there's herbs, there's homeopathics, there's so many different ways. There's CBD things that work for people when other things don't.
Yeah.
But realize with sleep, that's at a deep cellular level. So that sleep sometimes is one of that's why I have it at the end. Sometimes that takes a little bit longer to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are like staying in an environment that they know is moldy and not able to get out, you are going to be chasing some of these supplements and switching them around because the root cause is not addressed.
Yeah.
So, and then if you're working out, um, and you're depleted, I'm sorry, you're not sleeping, and then you're working out, you've just created more stress in your body.
Yeah.
You're probably going to gain more weight in the middle. You're probably going to have a harder time sleeping, and you might even have pain.
Yeah.
And just being okay again of stepping back, saying, I need to take a nap. I need to get up a little bit later if you can. I need to go bed a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Um, what can you do? And maybe it's even like an Epsom salt bath, at the end of the night,
Hmm.
which will also help. A lot of people don't realize with those Herx reactions.
Hmm.
If somebody has a reaction from a supplement or anything they're on, we call that herxing. Some people may not have heard that. And if they have a Herx reaction, an Epsom salt bath can actually stop that
Yeah.
reaction from going on. Plus, it's relaxing.
Yeah. Well, and then we've created like a homeopathic sleep spray that, I mean, it works for a lot of people. It's definitely for the profile of someone who's not sleeping because of mold. And anyone on this who knows about homeopathy, you're definitely trying to target the closest symptom profile with the ingredients that you have, because it's like treats like. So, I mean, that might help somebody. And then my other advice is, I used to do this thing where I would try to stay up to make myself
Right.
tired because I wasn't sleeping. And when I recognized the fact that it was actually better to go to bed before I was tired to help my sleep, that was helpful. And then also just avoiding alcohol. I know it's sometimes hard when you're really
Hmm.
stressed out, and sometimes you feel like a glass of wine might be the only thing to relax you to get you to sleep. But for me personally, it was so counterproductive.
Right.
I just, I mean, it did wonders for my sleep to not, I mean, my sleep scores went up tremendously.
Isn't that
Even,
amazing?
yeah, it is crazy when you see the data. That doesn't lie, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
anyway, those are just
Yeah.
tips.
Well,
Um,
and I love what you're saying about the alcohol too, because I talk to people about that, especially with the hormones, because of really how it wreaks havoc on your hormones. Is sometimes you just, again, it's that joy of adding new, which as I talked about, is instead, what kind of fun
yeah,
beverage can you make?
yeah,
Like, can you do a beverage and put in like ashwagandha in there, which will help
yeah,
you feel really relaxed. So while everybody else is like not feeling good the next day after that glass of alcohol, you can be like, yeah, I fixed myself a really fun beverage and I made a mocktail with ashwagandha in there. And now I feel so relaxed.
yeah,
Um, so maybe there's something that can support you. And again, as we talk about any of these supplements, make sure it's
oh,
right for you and you talk with
oh
your doctor
yeah,
about it. Yeah, so there's no but those are some things that you can be thinking about. Is it super fun? Put it in a fun glass. Put a little lemon, a garnish on it. It's all we're visually appealing, and then you have that at the end of the night.
yeah,
But speaking also, Catherine, to this whole idea of staying up, it's really interesting because depending on what genes you have, um, and there's one that's COMT, which comes up a lot in hormones. And depending on what kind of gene SNPs, or we call them dirty genes, you have, the way you clean them, people will come and go, yeah, it's horrible. I have these genes. I'm like, well, no, it's not a death wish. It's
no,
just you have to understand how to clean your genes, like how to make them function optimally. Is it's diet and lifestyle and what you do. But what's interesting is with mine, it took me a long time to figure out why was I kept staying up, and I realized it was mold.
hmm,
Is I couldn't go to bed because I was concerned about sleeping, but staying up actually dirtied that gene, which then caused a whole cycle. And I was like, why does this keep occurring? And it's really interesting. And so I always tell people, like, instead of getting frustrated, get curious as to why maybe you can't drop that habit.
oh yeah, for sure. And then, my advice also is just, and I'm just speaking from personal experience, not like medical advice, but I would do this thing where I would stay up thinking that then when I would lay down, I would be more tired. But then my brain would start going, well, I only have 4 more hours left that I can sleep. I only have, and when you go to bed earlier, you kind of take that out of the equation a little
Mhm.
bit. And, even if you fell asleep 2 hours after you actually went to bed, you would still have sufficient sleep to
Mhm.
operate the next
Yeah.
day. Whereas if you're going to bed after 11 o'clock, you're automatically, making that window so short that you're going to spin out of control, feeling like, oh no, only 3 more hours before I have to get up for work. And it's really, I mean, it makes you crazy anyway. So
Yeah, I agree.
and then number 11 is the last one, and that's address movement.
Yes.
So exercise, and we kind of talked about that, but I think it's important that it's in your list that movement is something that is healing, because I agree 110%, that I think
It's
everyone needs to move.
it's the right kind of movement.
Yeah.
I remember a day when I moved a lot, and then there was one day I literally had to lay on my acupressure mat most of the day. Like all of a sudden I was like, why is my energy gone? But that day to do that, that goes back to listening to the body. Then the next day I could move my body and my energy was through the roof again. It
Mm-hmm.
was just when you push too hard and you don't have really good boundaries with understanding and being intentional. So that goes into intentionally moving in a way that's
Mm-hmm.
gentle, that's nourishing to your body, and that's going to help your body heal. So, are you to that point where you can exercise again? Those are questions you have to ask yourself. How are you feeling before and after? Are you out of breath? But then probably not. But walking is very nourishing for the body. But I remember, again, there were times where my legs felt so heavy
Mm-hmm.
that, and I would push through it. And that
Yeah.
was a huge mistake because I thought, oh, I'll just push, not realizing that was a sign that that was not, I had to stop before it happened, is
Mm-hmm.
to be intentional to say, oh, well, I can't go to my full 3 miles. And I had to be okay with
Yeah.
that because I had that guilt around, well, but I'm not getting in my 10,000 steps or
Yeah.
that type of thing. Stretching and being intentional around that. Yoga and then supporting that lymphatic flow, which we talked about, rebounding, vibration plate, um, sauna if you can do it, and anything that's going to, really pull in anything that's going to overtax your system.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's amazing is, I've talked to people about, help people with losing weight when they're dealing with mold, which is very tough because I had to figure out ways with myself and with my husband, because mold loves to hide in fat. And what I noticed is it was the things that were more nourishing that would allow me, like I'd wake up the next day 3 pounds down. I wouldn't have, I would have just walked. But it
Mm-hmm.
was the extra sleep and everything I did to support my
Yeah.
body that really allowed my body to drop the weight because it was healing to my body versus overly taxing. So someone's asking about the ice baths. Are you okay if I address that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, okay.
we'll move on to questions now
Okay.
because I know we're kind
Okay.
of coming up on the hour. So
Yeah. So ice baths, um, I do ice baths personally. Ice baths aren't right for everyone, depends on where your body is. Um, Ice baths I do, now I started doing after hot showers, but yes, ice baths can help. They unfortunately are not a magic pill, even with mold. There's no magic thing with mold, but yeah, it will wake you up. It will help with hyperbaric oxygen. Yeah, that's one. It will help with, um, sometimes it'll help you lose weight. It will help with reducing inflammation. There's a lot of benefits to that. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Yes, it's been known to help with mold, but the people that work it a lot of the times have told me it's quite a few treatments.
it
So I
is,
think,
and I'm gonna say a disclaimer. I use oxygen as part of like my therapy, and the doctor I worked with, and this was really important information for me, is oxygen is incredibly healing, but it gives your cells permission to come out of that cell
mm,
danger response where everything's slammed shut to protect you from the
yeah,
mold. So if you're going and doing hyperbaric and then going back to a moldy environment, it can be very dangerous because you may actually get a more toxic only
hmm,
because everything's opened up and ready to heal, and then you're going back to a very
yeah,
toxic environment.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's definitely just discuss it with your doctor, and make sure they know that you're living in mold. before you embark upon, a sequence of hyperbaric treatments. Just this is personal experience,
Yeah.
but I will tell you, it was incredible once I got out of the mold, and it took me leaps ahead probably of where I had been. But I had to be patient with it and wait till
Yeah.
it was the right time,
Right.
but
And that's such a valid point, is that we go back to that same thing of being intentional and also not getting caught up in too many things.
hmm
Is when you're in mold, there is not that much that can support you right now, and that's okay. The idea is to try to get your body to continually detox gently, and you can do that through food and do that through other ways too, which we can get into. I think someone had a question about that, but is not everything is going to be like doing a lot is not always the answer. It's that slowing down and
hmm
focusing on what's most important right now
hmm
to get you to start feeling better so you can start functioning and
yeah.
then start healing at a good pace. Because if you detox too quickly, we say the detox pathways aren't open and you're in a moldy environment, your body just can't keep
Yeah.
up. And that's when people start having a lot of problems. And I will say, two people at least that have come to see me that have been in a lot of, been treated a lot, I noticed were in moldy environments, and that's why they had the huge reactions
hmm
and things didn't work because it was too much for their bodies and they didn't know they were in mold.
Yeah. And if you're in mold, there are things you can
Yeah.
do. There like many of the more protective supplements that are like liver protective,
Mm-hmm.
polyphenols are
Mm-hmm.
great. Things that are not so heavy on the detox and more heavy on protection, are really good when you're in mold. Somebody was asking about that, and I know that's a question for you, like what can be done when I'm still living in mold, in other words.
So when you're living in mold, and you have had some really great examples and tips, is you want to first address the clean air piece. What can you do? Do you have anything going on in there? I know there's different machines that have been mentioned before. Drew and I talked about there's high tech machines. There's all kinds of things if you want to invest. Is having a good air filter in there and making sure that an air cleaner really that it is actually cleaning mold. Some of them air cleaners do not work for mold, um, and there's quite a few out there that do, and just making sure that you have something in your environment there. Secondly, some of the best ways to address things is through food.
hmm
Like taking a binder that is not always possible for people while they're in mold because it's sometimes too much. Some people can tolerate it, others cannot. And so those binders can be your food. So, turning to things like your flaxseed, your chia seed, and the ones that are less binding up, because as you move more and more towards like psyllium husk, which is another insoluble fiber that's kind of acts as a binder, pulling things out, that might not be so great for people that get constipated, which we didn't talk about, but that's very, very common with mold, and I do help people flip that. But is just looking and saying, what can I do right now? So I can do, if you're doing any kind of foods putting into place, if you're also, light on the supplements, is looking at what kind of supplements can I have out there too? What can I do for that? Getting outside is huge. Walking, um, sauna. You sometimes your body can tolerate that. You can start pulling things out slightly, and there's been a lot of research on doing any kind of binders, even through food, before a
hmm
sauna, too, to kind of support your body overall.
Yeah.
Some people do well with certain essential oils. There are certain ones that have been studied specifically for mold, um, and making sure that you use the right ones. Thyme, I know there's some other ones. I think cedar was one on there. Is making sure that you can use that in the space, as well. So there's so many little
Yeah.
things that you can do while you're in mold. But the real biggest key is open up your windows, get some clean air in.
Yeah.
Leave for, if you can go on vacation, if you can leave for like a week,
Yeah.
If you can leave the house, if you can get out, I tell people the grocery store, try to get out as much as possible, but lean into the foods, lean into what supplements you can do that support your liver so that you're not dealing with the liver symptoms such as the chemical. People have huge chemical smells. That's a sign usually that your liver is toxed. Or
Yeah.
if you have more like brown spots, age spots, that's another sign that your liver needs a little bit more support too.
Yeah.
So really understanding that there are some things you can do and just having hope there.
Yeah. Milk thistle and Epsom salts are good, just to answer the question that's on there. And then here's some, I'm going to try to get to all these questions really quick because I know we're on the hour. So, how do I know if mold not yet found was the cause of my vertigo in mid 2017 or from, I don't know if we can really answer that, or from too many antidepressants, vertigo. I mean, mold definitely can cause vertigo, but um, I don't know if ongoing vertigo would be caused by previous mold exposure. Would it be? I don't,
I have seen people that do have ongoing vertigo from ongoing mold exposure, and it's usually the people because we can't diagnose or of
yeah.
this, but it's usually the people that were in mold for years, and this was just like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
So when I do the foundational call, we put everything together, and I find out like they've been in mold like most of their life.
Hmm.
So that's why they have a bigger reaction. It was the last straw was this particular situation, and that's why the vertigo has stayed. So those are the times where I see like the ringing in the ears or the vertigo when they've been in it for so many
Yeah.
times.
And I would also say, like, if you have ongoing sinus issues with the vertigo, I mean, I know all of the studies about, when they test the mucosa, it's mycotoxins are basically like being produced like inside your nose if you're colonized. So, that could be something to think about, maybe doing, some of the antifungal nasal things and seeing if
Yeah,
that improves. Um, so, definitely if vertigo is an issue, nasal rinsing with antifungals is probably a good route to take.
yeah, yeah.
And then what steps can be done while exposed to mold to help detox it out? I think we kind of talked about that.
We did.
Sauna,
Yeah.
rebounding, lymph. How do we know if we have colonization?
Mhm. So it depends on your symptoms. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're dealing with a lot of sinus symptoms, um, if you're dealing with congestion, if you're dealing with like histamine
Mhm.
responses, then it is leaning more towards that. But here's what I'm going to ask you for whoever asked that question is ask yourself, why is that so important?
Mhm.
Because sometimes we get caught up in these terms, and I have
Yeah.
this, and I have I have mast cell, and I have this and that. Those diagnoses are great, but if that diagnosis makes you feel defeated and overwhelmed, then I say let's drop that.
Yeah.
Let's just work on symptoms. Symptom like every symptom to say, well, whether it's colonization or not, let's
Hmm.
work on the histamine issue because the histamine issue could be a whole nother thing. It could be that the food you're eating, like let's go on a low mold diet. Let's see how the diet works for
Hmm.
you and see some of the lifestyle things may change. You getting out of mold for more often, reducing that fungal load. Hey, all of a sudden now you're not having that
Yeah.
colonization. So let just asking yourself why are maybe some of these answers so important?
Yeah. I mean, that's why and we were talking about this earlier when we were just talking together, but that's why we both love homeopathy
Yeah.
so much because it's really targeting exactly how you feel, not some diagnosis, not like I've got a cough or it's like, do you have a fever that's radiating from your eyeballs? Like it goes after that because you're trying to uproot whatever the cause
Yeah.
of that ailment or malady is. So I would definitely encourage anyone on this to look into homeopathy, especially if they're very sensitive to supplements, because it would be very rare to not tolerate homeopathic remedies. I found that for myself. I don't know if you've had a similar
So
experience.
with the homeopathy, that's interesting. So when I had a daughter with PANS, homeopathy was brutal at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that we had to do later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I found that I had to kind of layer it
Mm-hmm.
in. So certain things I had to do at certain times. Sometimes the homeopathy was too strong
Mm-hmm.
for me. And and then also being careful. So there's formulations that are like for mold
Mm-hmm.
versus what we call a constitutional. So understanding there's a difference. Like some of those mold formulations might be too strong for you.
Yeah.
Now it may help your body very much at the end,
Mm-hmm.
even more um, when you've reduced a lot of your load
Yeah.
and your symptoms and things like that, that those stronger ones. But maybe in the beginning you have to use things that are individual homeopathic remedies that are specific to you
Mm-hmm.
to help your body kind of acclimate and get to that next level so that that homeopathy I know can be very helpful for also getting your body to the point where it stops being so
Mm-hmm.
reactive. I've heard a lot of that research on
Oh
that
yeah.
of because we hear right people going from place to place and moving and you can't mold is everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and just learning how your body can, you know, once you clear how to keep it detoxing on a regular basis.
Yeah, you want to become more resilient for sure over time so that you can live your life,
Yes.
heal, and then work on being harder to kill, I guess.
Yeah.
after
To
after
take
that.
down. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then the last question, and this is a good one, is how do I work with you?
Yeah. So great question. So there's a lot of ways to work with me. Probably the initial way is you can go directly to my website, Be Well with Colette, or you can click the link above in my Instagram, Be Well with Colette. And
Okay.
there is a button there for a health recovery call, which is 30 minutes, which is free, which I give to people. The other thing is I do have a course. So if you're one of those people that are like, hey, I love to listen to these bite-sized videos. I want to know how to connect the dots on my own with my own body. And I want some light coaching
Mhm.
and I like group coaching too. That's a good route for you too. And there's a link to that up there too. So there's so many ways to work with me. If you're not sure, just reach out. Let's do a call. And based on
Okay.
our call, I'll be able to direct you. Yeah.
And you can also DM us and we'll send you her information and we're going to tag her in the caption and everything. So, and if you read the article, it has links to her website on there too. Um, okay. And Kevin is answering, and Kevin actually works for us. He's awesome.
Oh,
So, he's telling Allie that yeah, skin rash is can definitely be a symptom for sure. So I'm not saying that you do have mold exposure. I'm just saying it is definitely a symptom. So, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I
yes.
think this was
This is
great.
wonderful. Oh,
And
thank
then
you.
hopefully we can do it
Yeah.
again in the future.
This was
Okay.
wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Good to see you.
everybody. And
Yes.
we'll announce the winner of the nasal spray. We'll put it in stories and then we'll DM you. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Good
Good
night.
night. Bye, everyone.